What's going on, you guys, and welcome to the final tutorial on the React with FastAPI series. So in the last video, we went ahead and created our login component where we can log in an existing user. So test.test.com, one that I already created, and log in. And we come to this kind of very blank page with our table placeholder. And in this video, we're going to be focusing on the table itself, and we'll be looking at using these endpoints. So all the endpoints relating to getting leads, creating one, updating one, and deleting one. So we'll be looking at that here. So the first thing we want to do is jump into our components directory and create a new file, and we'll call this table.jsx. And this is where the table itself will be. So we'll go ahead and import React from React. And what we need as well is are a few more things. So we also need Moment, which we installed when setting up our front end. So in that video, so we can import Moment from Moment. We also need our error message. So import error message. Why is that not automatically error message? Never mind. Usually it'd show the auto import, but we can just do import error message from error message. We can also import our user context. So import in curly brackets user context from the context / user context. Oops, and it's not like that, spelled it wrong. User context. And yeah, so what we can do for now is create our table component. So const table equals, takes no props. And let's get our token. So const and then token equals use context, which is automatically imported, and then user context. So we'll get the token from that. We also want our leads. So we'll say leads and then set leads. And that will be a use state, which for now will be a null value. So by default, it will be null. And the leads, so this leads variable will hold the all the leads that that user has created. So when it's fetched from the API. We'll also do our error message and set error message. And we'll say a use state, and that will be an empty string by default. And let's go ahead and create a few more. So const and then loaded and then set loaded. And this will be a Boolean value. So use state and then false by default. And we also need an active modal Boolean value, which will be the which will hold whether or not we need to show the modal or not. So when we create a user, the user will see a modal where they can enter like all the information about the lead that they want to create. So within that, we can say active modal and then set active modal, and we'll say use state, and we'll say false by default. And then we also want the ID, and we need the ID for when we are updating the lead as well. So for example, when we click on the modal, as you'll see later, we need to pass in the ID for getting that lead itself and filling in the form. But again, that hopefully should be a bit more clear later on. And this will be use state, equals use state, and that by default will be null. So to begin with, let's go ahead and create a function that will get our leads first. So we'll say const and then get leads, and this will be asynchronous, which takes in no parameters, and we'll say const request options equals, and then we want the method, which will be a get. Oops. We also want like the headers, so we can actually take this from somewhere else. I don't know where else we use it. We use it here. No, I think we use it in this. Yeah, we also need the like authorization. Never mind, we can go ahead and just enter it ourselves. So we can say headers. I think it may be in the context. But yeah, we'll just type it in manually for now. Type, and then this will be application, and then / JSON. And then we also want to say authorization, and there we'll have bearer, and then space, and then plus token. So that those are our request options. And then let's actually make the request. So response equals await, and then fetch. And the endpoint is / API / leads. And we'll say request options. And then we'll get the data. So data equals await response dot JSON. And let's do a quick check. So if the response is not okay, we can set error message to something went wrong, couldn't load the leads. Otherwise, we will go ahead and say set leads to the data that we get back, and set loaded to true. And as we are like not accessing data within this else, we can actually just go ahead and throw it within this in the else statement rather than have it loaded before that. Yeah, so that's our get leads. And now we can go ahead and create our use effect. So every time this load pages, we want to fetch all the leads. So we can say use effect. And what this will do is get the leads, but we want an empty list at the end. Say get leads, just like that. So that gets our leads. So now we have our leads stored. What we can do now is return the table itself. So to begin with, we'll create a empty tag, and within the empty tag, within the empty tag, let's first create a button, which will be our create button. So this will just be create lead, and the class name for that will be button and is full width. So I'll take the full width and make it like right in front of the user's face. And then the margin bottom will be 5, as we want to give it some space between that and the table. And we'll set the color to is primary. And we don't have any like functionality with this create button yet, but we'll add that in later on. And we can also add our error message. And the message for that will be the error message. Now we can actually create the table. So we'll only display the table if 2 conditions are met. So first, if loaded, and as an extra like security check, you can just say if the leads exist as well. And within that, we can go ahead and say, so the table, and just at the end here, just so we can fix this error right away, we'll just say like p, we'll just say loading. Yeah, so if they haven't, like if there are no leads yet or anything like that, if we're still waiting to get our leads, it will show this loading message. But yeah, so for our table, we need the class name, which will be table, and we want to set it the full width of what it's in. And then within that, we can go ahead and create our table headers first. So t head, and then the row. And within that row, we'll say the first header will be first name. And we just need to copy this a few times. So this one will be last name. This one will be the company. Next will be the email. Then we'll have the note. And finally, we can say last updated. So that's for the headers for the data. And we just need one more, and this one will be actions. So instead of last updated, we'll say actions. And each row will hold two actions, which will be either update or delete. But yeah, that's it for now. Let's go ahead and export default table. And let's go and actually see what it looks like right now. So go into app.jsx. We can first load the table. So import table from components/table. And then in here where we have our placeholder table, we can go ahead and just say table. Now, if we go back, we'll have the create lead button along with the table. It doesn't show any data, of course, but yeah. And with this user, because as I'm logged in as the test@test.com user, I should already have some leads, but we can go ahead and see that in a second. So yeah, that's our like table header. Now we can go ahead and fill in the body. So underneath table head, so t head, we can say table body. And within that, we can loop over each of the leads that we get back from the request. So for leads.map, and then we need lead. So for each lead, we want to display the relevant information. So what we want first is the table row, and the table row will take in a key, and it's important that we have the key, as a lot of data I think could lead to some trouble as to what row you're doing some action on. And then TD, which I don't know what it stands for, so if you do know, please let me know. And the first one will be first name, so we have to match it up with each of the headers. So we'll say lead.first_name. Just copy it down a few times. And then we have last name. We also have the company. We have the email. We have the note. And the last, or I think it's called date last updated. So if I go back, yeah, I already have some information. I have the first name, last name. So Frodo Baggins, company, Fellowship of the Ring. There's no email or note associated to that. And one thing you'll realize is that we have the last updated, but it's like a really ugly time or like date. So we have like, yeah, I mean, if you're used to this kind of format, you'll probably read it, but I guess if an actual user were to look at it, they'd be a bit confusing. It'd just be like a whole pile of like numbers. So this is where our moment library comes in. And what that will do is just allow us to kind of format this in a nice way. So we can say moment, and then put that in parentheses, and then just format it in a way that's like nice to look at. So I'll say month, and then day, year. So I have to go back. I see August 1st, 21. So 2021. And you can also include the time there as well if you want. But yeah, that's basically our data shown in the table. Last thing we want to do is create our action buttons. So we can say another TD and then button. And this one will have a class name of, let's say, well, first button and then margin right of 2. So we want a bit of space between each button, as there will be the update button and the delete button. And we can say is info and is dash light. And here we can say update. And we can go ahead and copy that a couple times, one more time, for the delete button. And instead of is info, we can say is danger. And we can just add delete. So yeah, you should see something like this. None of this actually works right now because we haven't added any functionality around these buttons. But yeah, the table's coming along. We can actually get the leads now. So what we want to do now is actually work on this create lead. So when we click on that, a modal will show up for the user, and the user will be presented with a form where they can enter like the first name, company, all that, and then submit it. So let's go ahead and create another component, and we'll call this our lead modal.jsx. So for the lead modal, what we want to do first is actually import React from React. And what we can do is, yeah, first let's just create the component. So lead modal equals, and then we want to add some props in. So our first prop is the active. So is the modal active or not? And this is what we'll use to determine whether or not we should show the modal. And this will be passed in from the table. And that active will be this here, this active modal variable. So we have active and we have handle modal, which will be a function that we haven't created yet. We need the token, so the token of the authenticated user, as we'll be sending data to the backend. The ID, and also set error message. So let's go ahead and create the kind of variables we need for the form. So first name and set first name. And we need the use state, so use state, which is automatically imported on line 1. Let's just copy that a few times. I keep saying couple, I mean a few. And then set last name. The next one we need is the company. You can say set company. We also need the email. So set email. And we also want the note as well. So maybe I created one too many, but yeah. So set note, and this one we can just delete. So let's first of all go ahead and just create our JSX for it for now. So we can say return, and then we want the div with the class name. Actually, this div is going to be conditional, so we need to enter ourselves. This class name will be inside curly brackets, and we need backticks because this will be based on a variable. And we'll say modal, so that's the first class. And then the second one will be a conditional. So if it's active, then show is active. So yeah, that's our conditional class. Next, we can actually build out the modal itself. So class name here will be modal background, which will give it like a dark backdrop. So modal background, and we'll say on click equals the handle modal. So if we click on the background, then it should close the modal. Then we can go ahead and create a modal card. And within modal card, we'll have a header. And this header will have the class name of a few class names. Modal card head, and then has background. Oops. as background, and then we'll just say primary light. And within that, we'll have, a kind of title for it. So we can say H1, and we'll give, say, class name. And the class name will be modal card title. And this will be conditional. So if there's an ID passed in, then it will know that we're updating a lead. If there is no ID passed in, then we're creating one. So we can say, if there's ID, then it will be update lead. Otherwise, it will be create lead. Like so. And let's actually go ahead and export it for now. So export default and then lead modal. So what we can do back in table.jsx is, first of all, let's import it. So import lead modal. And now what we need to have is actually when we click on the create lead, we set the active modal to true. So down here where we have create lead, we do on click, this will be in curly brackets, and we need to create an anonymous function as we'll be passing a value into set active modal. So set active modal, and we'll say true. So now if we go back and we click on it, nothing shows up because we haven't actually used the lead modal. So just above button, we can say lead modal. And within that, we need to pass in the props. So active equals active, or active modal, sorry. We need handle modal, which is a function that we haven't created yet. So we'll go ahead and just do that now. So we'll say const handle modal. And this will be a function that takes in no parameters. And we can say set active modal to the opposite of what it already is. So active modal. And we'll say get leads. So every time we do some action with the active modal, it always refreshes the leads that we have. And finally, we will say set ID to null. So that's in the case of updating a user. So we can put in handle modal equals the function handle modal. Token equals token. And ID equals ID. As we have no ID right now, it's just going to be null. And then set error message to be set error message. So now hopefully it should work, and yet we have it up and running. So if I click create lead, we have just the header right now, create lead. If I click this black background or dark background, it closes it. But yeah, so there's still a few things left to add with lead modal. So let's jump back into lead modal.jsx and let's fill out this, the modal itself. So underneath header, let's create a section. And this section will have a class name of modal card body. As the name suggests, this will be the body of our modal, basically our form, and then form. And the form itself will just be empty. And then we'll have div, and that will have a class name of label, or sorry, not field, sorry. Within that, we'll have a label, and then the class name for that will be label. Just get rid of this HTML4. And the label itself here will first be first name. So the first name of the lead that you're creating. We then want the input field, so we'll do div.control. And then we can say input type will be text. We'll have a placeholder equal to enter first name. We need the value, which will be the first name. We need the on change. So when we change the input field, we need to also update the first name as well. So E, so for the event, set first name will be the value of the input field. So target.value. Oops. And we need the class name of input. And finally, we'll set this to required as when you're creating a lead, you need to put in their first name. But yeah, now if we go back and click that, we have our first name. Let's go ahead and create a few more fields. So let's just copy this, paste it. Instead of first name now, we'll say last name and enter last name. Value will be last name and on change will be set last name. So now we have last name. Next, we need the company. So instead of the label here, we'll have company. Text will remain the same, enter company. Value will be company and set company. And this will not be required as, they may not, a lead may not actually belong to a company. And let's just do it for email now. So email, enter email, value email, and set email. Again, that's not required. So that's what we have now. So we have our email. And lastly, we just need our notes. So one more time and just say note, enter note. Oh, by the way, for the email, the type will be not text, but email. Enter note, value will be note, and set note. Oops. Set note. Cool. So if we go back, we have this now in our lead, or when creating a lead, our first name, last name, company, email, all that. So all that's working fine. Yeah, so let's go ahead and actually put in our kind of create helper function. So what we want to do is create a function that handles creating a lead. So we can say const handle create lead. And for that, this will be asynchronous. And then it will take in the event. So when clicking on the create button. So this first will do prevent default. And then we'll create our request options. So we can probably take from this table. So back in table.jsx, let's just copy this. Saves us some time. And instead of get, we'll say post. Application JSON, headers are the same. And now we just need to create our body. So after headers, we need body. And the body will be a JSON stringify. Oops. JSON.stringify. And then curly brackets, we'll say first name. And remember, this has to be like snake case because our backend accepts snake case. First name, last name, the company, the email, and then the note. So that's our, this is actually the request we're sending. And now we can actually go ahead and actually make that request. So we can say const and then response equals await. and then fetch /API/leads, and then just throw in the request options. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and do our like standard check to see if the request was successful. So if the response is not okay, then we can say set error message to something went wrong when creating lead. Otherwise, what we want to do is first clean up all this like first name, last name, all that, because that will still exist if we then go ahead and create another one. So let's create a helper function that will do that. So const and then clean form data. And for clean form data, all we need to do is just like clean up the variables here. So first name, last name, all that. So we'll say set first name to an empty string again, set last name to an empty string, set the company to an empty string, set email to an empty string, and set note to an empty string. So now back in our else, inside our else statement, we can go ahead and first clean form data. And then finally, we can just call the handle modal function that we pass in. So it closes it. But yeah, so we can go ahead and actually check this out. But before we do that, we need to implement this handle create lead back down here with the create button, which we also need to add. So down underneath at the bottom of the JSX, so underneath section, we will create a footer. And this footer will have a class name of modal-card-foot and has a background primary light to match with our header. And then within that, let's go ahead and say, if there is an ID, then we will display a button that says update, and otherwise we will display create. And let's just give it some class names. So class name here will be button and then is info. And then for create, we can add our class name first. And this again will be button and then is primary. And we also want to add our on click, which will be handle create lead. And sorry for all the bouncing around, that's the auto formatter. But yeah, that's our update and create button. We can just create another one saying cancel, as it may not be intuitive to the user to click on the background to close it. So we'll just say cancel here. And the class name for that will be button and just say is just a plain button, to be honest. And then this on click will call the handle modal function that we pass in. Cool, so let's, fingers crossed, let's go ahead and try this out. Already we have a first set of errors. It's because the handle modal, this cancel, we don't actually call the function. That's incorrect. It's just handle modal. Otherwise, like, it will just run that every time you load that button. But let's create a new one. Let's say Harry, and then Potter, company, Hogwarts, email. Let's leave the email and note out, create it. And there we go. We have Harry now, Hogwarts. And yeah, one thing that would be nice, we could have added like a sort kind of function in the back end that like sorts it from, or make a sort SQL statement that will sort this data out based on when you created it. But for now, it's fine. But yeah, we have our Harry Potter Hogwarts that we just created. Create a few more if you want. But that's our create lead. And this is where the clean form data comes in handy, because otherwise, like, this will still hold the Harry Potter information. And we have the cancel button now, which works as well. Yeah, so what we can do now is go ahead and create a function which will allow us to delete the user. So back in table.jsx, what we want is a handle delete. And to do that is pretty straightforward compared to what we've currently done. Let's create a help function called handle and then delete. And this will be async. And we need to pass in the ID, so the ID of the lead that we want to delete. And we need the request options. So let's just copy this here. Paste it in. The method will not be get, it will instead be delete. And we can now go ahead and make that request. So const, and then response, it equals await, and then that will fetch. And with this will be backtick, so the weird looking single quotation mark looks like that, because we'll be passing in a variable. And this will be /API /leads $, and then ID. Oops. And just to be extra clear, the endpoint we're calling is this one here. So this in red, this delete. Yeah, so let's first go ahead and check to see if the response was successful. So if the response was not successful, so not okay, then what we'll do is just say set error message, oops, to fail to delete lead. And otherwise it will be successful, and we just want to refresh our get leads. Cool. And also, yeah, we need to throw in within our fetch statement on here on line 24, we need to throw in request options as well. And that should be fine. We just need to go ahead and actually implement our handle delete. So if you go back down here and then on this delete, on this button or the delete button, we can say on click. And this will be an anonymous function as we're passing in parameters. We can say handle delete and then just lead.id. And that should be fine. So if we go back to Awesome Leads Manager, if I hit delete on Harry Potter, then it's now deleted it. And yeah, all good. So that's our read statements, are like get the list or read the list of leads. We can now create one. We can also delete one. The final step is to update. So in the lead modal, let's go ahead and create a function that will allow us to update the lead. So the first thing we want to do is when we're updating a lead, we'll be passing in an ID. So if there's no ID, it's going to infer that we're creating something. If there is an ID, so if the ID is not null, then it will then fetch the lead data. So let's say like Frodo Baggins that we have here, it will fetch all that and then display that in the form. So we want to do that. So what we can do is first of all create a use effect. So use effect, which again is imported, and then this will be first of all, let's just set it to like an empty list, and let's create a function that will get the lead. So get lead is async, and what this will do is first of all we need the request options, which I already have in my clipboard. So something exactly like that, basically. Method, get, headers, content type, application JSON, authorization, bearer token, all of that. So now what we want to do is actually make the request. So const and then response equals await, and then fetch, and we'll have backticks again as we're passing in a variable. So / API, and then leads / $, and the ID, and then at the end request options. So that's our request made, and then we can say await. Actually, we can just first check. We'll need the data, but first we can check if the response is okay. Oops. If response is not okay, sorry, then we can go ahead and say set error message to something, or could not get the lead. And then finally, we'll say, if everything works out well, we'll go ahead and update the information for first name, last name, company, email, note to the data that we get back from the request. So we'll say set first name to data. Actually, we need data first. So we'll say data or const data equals await, and then response.json. And we could say data dot first name underscore first underscore name. So the way we send it back from the Python backend as it's snake case, set last name to data dot last name. Duplicate that a few times. Then we want set company, and then say data.company, and set note to data.note. And yeah, so we don't need this last one. So what that's doing is if the response is successful, then just set in the update the first name, last name, company, and note, and that will automatically. Oh, we also need email. So just after company, we just need to set email to data.email. And yeah, that should be it. Yeah, so if the request is successful, then just update all these variables. But yeah, that's our get lead. Now we actually need to call it, and we'll only call it if the ID exists. So we can now say if ID, so if it's not null, then get lead. And here we can just say the dependencies are ID and token within this array here. Cool, yeah, so we have our get leads itself. Now what we need to do is actually in our table.jsx is make this trigger this to happen. So the update within the table.jsx component. So what we can do is let's create another function within our table component. We'll call it handle update. And this again will, just like the handle delete, it will be asynchronous, but also take in the ID and ID. And what this will do is first set the ID to ID, so the ID that we pass in, and set active modal to true, just like our create lead. Now we actually need to access this. So if we go down to our update button, what we can do now is just like we did with delete, we can say on click and throw in, this is an anonymous function, say handle update. Although we could probably name it a bit better as it doesn't actually handle the update. But yeah, it should be fine now. If we click update, we get all the information. So on Frodo Baggins, update, we get first name, last name, company, email, and yeah, the note that we put. And also you'll realize that the update header is now update lead rather than create lead. And the button down here is also like the update button with a different background compared to our create, which is like this. And that's something that should be cleaned up. But yeah, so that's our lead modal. But yeah, if we go back now, we can go ahead and inside lead modal, make the request itself. So inside lead modal.jsx, let's create a function that will handle update lead. So just like we have for handle create lead, let's create another one and call it handle update lead. So we'll say const and then handle update lead. And this again will be asynchronous. It will take in the event, so the button that we click, so our update button. And first we'll do prevent default. And we'll create our request options, which I've just pasted in again. But this time, instead of get, it will be put. And we need the body as well. So the body will be very similar to how we have with the create. So we can actually just copy that in. So from handle create lead, let's copy that body and just paste it in here. So that's our request options handled. Now let's go ahead and make the request. So const and then response equals await and then fetch and then backticks again. So /API leads and then the ID of the lead. So $ID and then just request options. Next, we can say if the response is not okay, then we'll set the error message to something wrong when updating lead. We can even pass in the lead name here if you want, just to make it a bit more clear. But yeah, so we can say else. What we want to do is, clean form data and also handle modal. So that will like clean out the form itself and then also just close the modal as well. We need to actually use this now. So in handle update delete, handle update lead, within our handle button, we can now actually call it. So we can say on click, and then we need to show this or throw this in as a anonymous function, as we will be, actually no, we don't need an anonymous function because we already have the ID. So we can just do handle update lead, like so. So now if with Frodo Baggins, if I update, I can say Frodo Baggins email, say Frodo at shire.com, update, and now we have it. We have the email, the note for some reason is not showing. I don't know why I didn't pick that up earlier. I think maybe in table.jsx. It's because here on line 101, I have note as uppercase. Yeah, so the note shows, we can update it again. Let's say talk about the ring and modal update. And yeah, let's create another one. Let's say first name, James, and then Bond, company, MI6, doesn't have an email because he's a spy. And then let's talk about, I don't know, create, we can update it, let's say, and other spying stuff. Update, and yeah, so everything successfully updates. We can delete it as well. We can refresh the page. Everything's still the same. Yeah, so that's basically it. That's our, like, this is the whole Leads Manager React Fast API series, now at an end. I definitely encourage you guys to go ahead and experiment more with this. If you've been following along, change some things up. Yeah, heck, even deploy it if you want. Um, but yeah, all this data is going to be, all this code is going to be available in the GitHub link I put in the description. So feel free to go ahead and check that out. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this series. There's more to come, and sorry about the delay that happened earlier on. However, yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, my Twitter is also in the description, along with the Discord server that I have up and running. So feel free to drop a message if you have any suggestions, or if you're working on a project and are looking for some help or whatever, feel free to do so there. But other than that, stay healthy and stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next video.